Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. As usual, we're going to wait just a minute for any latecomers who might be joining us. So we'll probably get started around the 12:01 mark. But thank you for making time to join us today. All right, we'll get started with the beginning housekeeping. I think I'm looking at the list here, and I think many of you have been to workshops before, but I think for some of you, this might be your first one. So I'll say welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Charla Rivera. I am the director of the Writing Lab. And the Writing Lab has turned 3 this year. So I'm very excited to be here with all of you today as we continue with our series in the Writing Lab. So today we're going to be talking about connecting ideas. So I'll go into that a little bit more. But one more thing that I wanted to share is that everybody is automatically muted when you join this webinar, just to cut back on the background noise and things like that as we go through the presentation. But I do have my chat box open at all times. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to add them in the chat as we go, and I'll answer them as I see them. And then at the end, I would say this one will probably be about 20-25 minutes. At the end, I will stick around for a few minutes to answer any questions you may have at the end as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So how can you tell when you might need some help with connecting ideas? So here are just some things that you may have heard before. So for example, maybe your professor is leaving comments on your papers like choppy, jumpy, flow, needs transitions, or how are these ideas related? If you're getting comments like this on your papers, probably means that you need to spend a little bit of time making sure all of your ideas are connected, okay? Or if somebody who has read your paper said that they have trouble following your organization, had trouble following your train of thought, maybe you're kind of writing in kind of a stream of consciousness. You're writing the way you think or the way you speak. Because speaking and writing are two different skills. And so if you're writing the way you think or the way you speak, it may not translate that well into writing on paper because you're missing some of the other context clues that might be happening. So if your brain is jumping around from idea to idea and you're writing stream of consciousness, probably need to take a step back and work on connecting those ideas. If you are writing your paper in chunks, like some students will work on one section for a paper and then step away for a day or two and then come back to a different section. If you're writing it in discrete chunks like that, then you might have trouble connecting the chunks. Or what I see even more commonly is many of you might be assigned group writing. And so when you're doing a group project, you're often saying, okay, well, I'll write the part about this and you write this part. And then you guys just kind of copy and paste it all together. And the problem with that is then we have a very clear line between speakers. And so it can help after the fact to add a little bit of connections in between your sections, okay? Oh, when this is what I just said, so you're working on a group paper. So if you're writing papers in chunks, or if you're writing in stream of consciousness, or you're getting comments like this is jumpy, it needs connections, then we probably need to spend some time connecting the ideas. So let's talk a little bit about this. So there are really what I consider two aspects to the feeling of flow as we're reading a paper, okay? So the first one is the order in which you organize. So this is kind of the first step, and I'll talk about this on my next slide, but first step is how are things actually organized? And then the second one is how have you constructed clear relationships between the parts? Okay, now this is really, really important because in the American academic style of writing, we make connections explicitly for our readers. It is our job as the writer to do all the heavy lifting to make the connections between ideas. Other cultures, other academic traditions might leave some of that responsibility to the reader, but for us here in a US academic context, we have to do all of the heavy lifting as the writers and explicitly say how things are connected, okay? But let's start with organization. So this is really the first step. It is much easier to go in and add the relationship, explicit relationship words. It's easier to go back to that later than it is to reorganize a paper that you've already written. So to really get started off on the right foot, you want to start with good organization. And so to do that, before you write, definitely create an outline. When your professor assigns an outline for you, it's not just busy work. Sometimes if you're writing capstone or a longer writing piece, your professor will actually give you a formal assignment that's an outline. And again, it's not just busy work, it's really to help you formulate your thoughts in the order that they should go, so that it makes sense, okay? So you wanna consider when you're making an outline, how ideas relate to one another and how you can order them for maximum effect. So you wanna think about, okay, what is the most effective point that I'm going to make? Do I want to start with that point or do I want to end with that point? Or how do I need to build up the background information before I get to that point? So these are things that you should be thinking about before you actually sit down and put pen to paper, so to speak, fingers to keyboards, to really think about how on a macro level, stepping a little further away, do I want my ideas to flow from one another? If you have already started writing, then it's not too late. We can still be thinking about outlining. So if you've already started writing or you finished your writing, you can still do some reverse outlining to help you see, again, on the macro level, stepping back for a second to see how the topics relate to each other. And sometimes in tutoring, I will do this with a student. If I find that things are a little disjointed, we'll step back, and what you actually do with reverse outlining is to look at what you already have written and write on the margins, or if you're doing it online on your computer, do a little comment with the main topic or a main idea of each paragraph so that you can look at it again, stepping far away to see, does it make sense that I talk about this topic and then this topic and then this topic? It can help you to step back and really look at it and see if your ideas are logically flowing one to another. Like I said, this is something that I commonly do in tutoring as well. If students are giving me papers that feel disjointed, it can help you visualize how your ideas are flowing or not flowing, okay? So the first step with connecting your ideas is organizing the ideas in the first place. But then once you're actually writing, you want to make sure that you're considering the relationships between the ideas. And these are relationships that you construct by explicitly telling your reader how ideas are connected or what idea is coming next. You are explicitly saying this for your reader so that they can follow along with your thought process, okay? So in doing this, you can use transition words, and I'll talk about transition words in a little bit. I also have a handout that I'll be giving you as well that gives some help with transition words, okay? You can also consider keywords and synonyms, maybe repeating the same word. I'll talk about this in a moment as well. And also just the logical connections. And this might be actually how the order of how you're writing things within paragraphs. So rather than the macro view of your paper as a whole, kind of zooming in on the paragraph level and seeing if the order of your ideas is logical. Okay, so let's talk about transition words. So you want to consider the relationships between the ideas. If you attended my very first workshop, the writing process, back in September, you might remember that I talked a little bit about considering, you know, are you writing a compare and contrast paper? Are you writing an argumentative paper? That kind of thing. It's important to consider, how are the ideas actually related? Because you don't want to just throw in any old transition word. You want to make sure that it actually is reflecting the type of relationship that these ideas have with one another. So for example, is it a contrast where things are different? So you might use words like but, nonetheless, on the other hand, okay? Are you comparing where things are the same? So you might say similarly, in the same way. Are you giving an example? The most common one for an example would be for example, but you can also say for instance, namely, that kind of thing. Emphasis. Emphasis sometimes can be tricky because I find sometimes students are using the emphasis ones not necessarily in the right place. So it does take a little bit more practice than some of the other relationships. But if you're really trying to, let's say you've kind of explained your argument and then you get to the end of the paragraph and you really want to bring it home, then you could say like, in fact, or even, you know, blah, 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 and you can really bring your idea home a little bit more. Cause and effect, okay, because, therefore, consequently, okay. And I do have a handout for these transition words, or connectors as I call them in my handout. Unfortunately, Zoom, for whatever reason, is not letting me send files during the chat. So I will send you the handout on these connectors and transition words when I send you the recording of this as well, okay. All right, so those are just a few examples. This is an inexhaustive list of transition words that you can use. Again, these are what you are using to construct the connections between ideas yourself. They can happen at the beginning of paragraphs, they can happen within paragraphs, but it's just really important to think that as you're moving through ideas, consider your paper as a chain, and that every link in the chain has to clearly link to the next one, okay? So using these transition words is one way to think of it. Using keywords is also helpful. So if there are very important keywords to your topic, repeat those keywords. And you can repeat them within the same paragraph or within the same sections, okay? If you're afraid of being a little bit repetitive, you can try a different part of speech. So maybe your keyword is economy, which is a noun. And if you're afraid of, you know, every sentence saying economy, 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 then you can use a different part of speech and change it from the noun economy into the adjective economic. Or maybe there's a synonym that you could use for the keyword as well. Just be careful with synonyms, because synonyms are not always perfectly interchangeable. So for example, an economy is a financial system, but it's also more than a financial system. So you want to make sure that when you are using a synonym, that it actually works in the context in which you are trying to place it, okay? And then you want to think about flow, okay? And this is where I was talking about kind of the logical connections, the order within paragraphs, okay? So let's think about this. I'm going to give you some example sentences. So when you're discussing new ideas, the order in which they appear matters. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples here, okay? So, before I get to the examples, I guess let me explain, okay? So the stress position, like the emphasis position, is usually the second or the last part of a sentence. I'm talking about a sentence level right now, okay? The topic position is the first part of a sentence. So typically when we're writing a sentence, in the first part, we might say what the topic is, and in the second part, that's where we put the most important information. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. So here's two example sentences. I want you to read them both and consider which one sounds like you're going to get a raise, okay? So I have these two sentences. The first one, you deserve a raise, but the budget is tight. The budget is tight, but you deserve a raise. In which one, first or second? You can put it in the chat. In the first or second one, are you possibly getting a raise? Absolutely. And the second one, it sounds like you are getting a raise. Where in the first one, it sounds like we would love to give you a raise, but the money just isn't there right now. Okay. So it's important to consider how the order of the ideas affects how the ideas impact. Okay. Here's another example. Which sentence sounds like you might get a good grade? You've participated very actively, but you haven't turned in much homework. You haven't turned in much homework, but you've participated very actively. Again, which one sounds like you're going to possibly get a good grade? First or second? Yeah, same as before. Okay, so the information in the stress position is what's giving us the important salient information that your reader is going to walk away with. Okay, so let's consider our two examples where we're getting money and getting a good grade, and think about what the second following sentence might be. So the budget is tight, but you deserve a raise. Okay, the raise will come into effect next pay period. So notice that I have, you deserve a raise. And then the next thing I talk about in the next sentence is again the raise. The raise will come into effect next pay period. Okay. If you didn't want to repeat the word raise, you could say it or this. Okay. If you're not wanting to repeat the same word too many times. But the important part is that it's going to flow much better, much more naturally if the topic is in a corresponding piece, a corresponding part of each sentence, okay? So similarly, you haven't turned in much homework, but you've participated very actively. Because of this active participation, I'm adding extra credit to your grade. That's a possible following sentence, and we're all hoping for that sentence, right? Both sentences, actually. Okay. So let me show you what this would look like on a paragraph level. So here's a paragraph. I'm going to read it to you very quickly. I really want to point out that there's nothing grammatically wrong with this paragraph. There's nothing that Grammarly is going to point out to you or anything like that. This is grammatically fine, but it's not exactly the best in terms of flow. So let's look at it together. The compact fluorescent bulb has become the standard bulb for household lamps. Until recently, most people used incandescent bulbs in their lamps. Heating a tungsten filament until it glows, throwing off light, is how this type of bulb operates. Unfortunately, approximately 90% of the energy used to produce the light is wasted by heating the filament. Nothing particularly wrong here, except that it's a little bit choppy as I read it. And if we look at the actual topics of each of the sentences, we can see why it feels a little bit choppy. So if we look here, we have the first sentence, we have the word lamps. Just look at the order of these topics. So I have lamps, bulbs, filament, bulb, filament, okay? Not exactly super connected. All the ideas are there, the ideas are clear, but it doesn't read nice and smoothly. If we compare that to this sentence or this paragraph over here, same information, just moved around a little bit, okay? So let's look at it, and I've color-coded this one too so we can see it a little bit more clearly. I'll read it aloud to you, but just note that in the first one, again, we have lamp, bulb, filament, bulb, filament. In this one, we're gonna talk about lamps, then bulbs, then filaments, and it flows together. So we can see what it looks like. The compact fluorescent bulb has become the standard bulb for household lamps. Until recently, most lamps used incandescent bulbs. This type of bulb operates by heating a tungsten filament until it glows, throwing off light. Unfortunately, heating the filament wastes approximately 90%. So you can see that in this one, in the second option, we are ending with an idea, ending a sentence with an idea, and then starting the next sentence with a similar idea. And then we end that sentence with an idea and starting the next one with a similar, so that we have our little chain that's going along, all of our little links in the chain that go along. And this is on the paragraph level, but this also scales out to the whole essay level, okay? So you can think about that and think about the first sentence of a paragraph and the last sentence of a paragraph, the concluding sentence, and think, does that link my paragraphs together? So that if we really look at it, you know, within a paragraph, we have a little chain, and then we look at the essay as a whole, and we have a bigger chain where the paragraphs are connecting to one another, okay? Yeah, so I think that's it. So I said about 20 minutes, so I'm right here at the 20-minute mark. Um, as usual, this has been recorded, so I will be sending this out to you within the next day or two. I'll send you guys the copy of the video as well as the PowerPoint I have here, and then my handout that I'm not able to send over Zoom. So as usual, I will hang out here for, we'll say 5 minutes or a little longer if anybody has any questions. You can type your questions in the chat, or you can, at this point, feel free to unmute yourself. If you have no other questions and you just need to go make yourself a sandwich before your next meeting, feel free. We are all finished for today. And I hope to see you guys in a couple of weeks when we do the in-text citation workshop in 2 weeks. All right. Thanks for joining. And as usual, I'll hang out for a couple of minutes. Thanks, everybody.